Imaging. Key to health? Near the end of World War II, a young American soldier named Lou Miller was caught in a burst of German machine gun fire. 5 bullets smashed into him, 2 in his left arm, 1 in his shoulder, 2 in his head. He was taken to a military hospital more dead than alive. Weeks passed, then months. His normal weight of 192 pounds dropped to 90. He was so weak that if he tried to stand, he fell on his face. He was a brave man and he struggled valiantly to regain his strength, but recovery was so slow and painful that it seemed almost hopeless. He tried praying, but his prayers seemed feeble and futile to him. Doctors did their best, but their best seemed to make little difference. Sometimes, to make the endless hours pass more quickly, Lou Miller would try to recall happy scenes from the past, athletic triumphs he had had as a boy, or occasions when he had won scholastic prizes or honors. He would picture the applause of the crowds, the pride and happiness on his parents' faces, the satisfaction he had felt. He tried to visualize these events as vividly as possible, because when he did he could forget, momentarily, the hospital bed where he lay. As he reviewed these memories, Lou Miller began to be aware that most of them seemed to have a common denominator. Each time he had scored a triumph or gained an objective, he had had a mental picture of the success before it actually happened. Whether it was winning a tennis tournament or placing in the first 10 runners in a cross-country race, he had seen himself doing it in advance, and when he clung to that image with unswerving faith, the actuality seemed in some uncanny way to follow the dream. Lou Miller had plenty of time to think, and gradually he began to see, just as years later Harry DeCamp would see, a connection between this before and after pattern and some of the great promises of the New Testament. He remembered that what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. Was it possible, Lou Miller asked himself, that a strong mental image, backed by intense faith, could actually be a form of silent prayer, prayer unencumbered by words? And if that were so, might he not hasten his own recovery by visualizing it happening and claiming Christ's promise at the same time? Lou Miller had believed all along in the power of God, but now he began to see that to liberate that power in his own life it was his responsibility to create the image of his own recovery and nurture it with faith. And so, with a sudden surge of determination and energy, he began to do just that. He saw himself returning home. He saw himself driving a car, holding down a job, resuming a normal, everyday sort of life. Looking beyond that, he saw himself raising a family, taking part in civic affairs, pursuing a career. Not only did he visualize these things over and over, with all possible intensity, but he also began to thank God in advance for turning these visions into reality. We are essentially minds with bodies, Lou Miller told himself, not the other way around. Therefore our minds can dominate and control our bodies. If I affirm and visualize my recovery, my thoughts will steadily be forming and producing their physical counterparts. As soon as all these concepts came together in Lou Miller's mind, he felt a remarkable upsurge of hope and well-being. To the doctor's amazement, he began to mend rapidly. Today Lou Miller is a happily married man with 2 children. He leads the normal, happy, and productive life that he imaged so vividly in that army hospital so many years ago. He is convinced that he groped his way to one of the most powerful healing combinations in the world, intense imaging plus unshakable faith. And it brought him back from the edge of the grave to the land of the living. What does medical science make of stories like this one? Naturally, there is division of opinion. Some doctors believe that all illness is a reflection of mental or emotional states. Others do not go that far. And certainly a layman like myself cannot pretend to be a judge. I was interested to read a brochure announcing a course called Guided Imagery and the Body-Mind Approach to Optimum Health by Jean Achterberg, Ph.D., and G. Frank Lawless, Ph.D. This brochure, in describing the program to be offered, stated, "Imagery has been the golden thread running through effective medical practice for over 3,000 years. Imagery appears to be the bridge between psyche and soma. It is central to learning biofeedback, and may be the basis for understanding and increasing the power of the placebo effect. As such, imagery may well prove to be the single most important technique for modern healthcare. 30 years ago, an authority on psychosomatic medicine, Dr. Arnold A. Hutschnecker, wrote, "We, ourselves, choose the time of illness, the kind of illness, the course of illness, and its gravity." And he added, "We are moving toward a recognition that in illness of any kind, from the common cold to cancer, emotional stress plays a part." Not long ago, I came across a newspaper story in which a California physician, Dr. Irving Oyl, was quoted as saying that people could live to be 150 years old if they would just practice a combination of right thinking and prayer. Positive, beautiful thoughts trigger the release of beneficial hormones in the body, and these in turn help the body to heal itself. On the other hand, he said, if you presume that you live in a hostile universe, the reaction to that presumption is what wears out your body. Then he added, prayer is a good way to combat anxiety and promote healing. When you pray, you assume that there is some force in this universe which is on your side. Some powerful force. The minute you do that, your body relaxes. And if you really believe that God will respond to you, you have immediately instituted the healing process. Faith itself creates the hormones that make you live longer. Basic keys to healing: hope, faith, truth. These seem to be the key. When you have them, you can image your own recovery and speed the healing process. When you don't have them, you can't. Dr. Sanford Cohen, chief of psychiatry at Boston University School of Medicine, has made some studies that seem to indicate that hopelessness, that is, an image of no recovery, actually kills. If a doctor diagnoses a fatal disease and tells the patient, and if the patient loses hope and gives up, death comes quickly. An autopsy may show the malignancy, all right, but no reason the patient should have died so soon. I once knew a woman whose elderly father was hit by a taxi as he was crossing a street in Manhattan and died at the age of 87. When an autopsy was performed, the doctor was amazed. Your father had all sorts of lesions and ailments that should have caused his death 20 years ago, he said to the woman. Yet you say he was lively and energetic right up to the end. How do you account for that? I don't know, the woman said, unless it was his habit of saying to me every single morning, today is going to be a terrific day. This daily imaging habit, it seems, paid off. A doctor friend once showed me X-rays of 3 human hearts. He said, "What do you think of those hearts?" Well, I said, I know nothing about hearts or X-rays. Is something wrong with them? The doctor said, you are looking at 3 damaged hearts. The owners of these hearts were negative people. They all expected to get ill or be ill. 2 of them expected to die young. On top of that, all 3 were living irresponsibly. I guess you might say their lives were full of sin. Were you able to help them? I asked. In part, he said. I took over your job. I showed them, with these X-rays, how the way they were living and the way they were thinking was affecting their hearts. I told them that if they went on much longer, their hearts would lose the capacity to rebound, but if they changed their attitudes and their habits and their thinking, their hearts could still recover because of the marvelous comeback potential the Creator had built into them. He chuckled. I guess you could say I scared the sin, out of them. Those people are healthy, vigorous, alive people today because they finally grasped the connection between their minds and their hearts, between moral or immoral living and the functioning of the most important organ in their bodies. You could make a sermon out of this, Norman. If you do, I suggest you tell your congregation that their bodies will take a lot of abuse, but the point finally comes where it won't take any more. And people had better turn away from downbeat thinking and wrong living before that point is reached, because afterward it is too late. Ruth and I have lived quite a few years now, and both of us have been remarkably free of illness all along the way. Ruth attributes her good health partly to the fact that as a child she ate simple foods, mostly vegetables. Money was scarce in the Stafford family, so there was seldom any meat. Ruth says she never tasted steak or rare roast beef until she went to college. She also thinks there is a strong connection between hard work and good health. If you keep really busy, she says. And she certainly does. You don't have time to think about yourself or your health. Or your lack of health. As for me, I'm convinced that human beings are supposed to be healthy. We are designed to be healthy. That is what the Creator intended when He made us. I constantly image myself as a disease-free individual. It reminds me of something an airline pilot told me one day when he came back through the plane to visit with us passengers. I said to him, "It always amazes me how these big planes stay up in the air. All this tremendous weight, all this fuel, all of these people, all their baggage. It is astonishing." "Not really," the pilot said. "It is the nature of airplanes to stay up in the air. They are designed to fly. They want to stay up in the air. It is very hard for a plane not to stay up in the air, because that is the way they are put together. That is the way God put us together, too. To be healthy, energetic, creative, dynamic people at every age, full of vitality and health. I'm sure of it. But we have a responsibility, too, not to abuse our bodies with alcohol or drugs or nicotine or other harmful substances, or too much food, for that matter. Nor should we abuse ourselves with overtension. It is hard to persuade people to avoid these things, especially young people, because they have great vitality and think they are immune to trouble and can go on indefinitely. They have to learn the hard way, and that can be unpleasant. The other night I was reading a book by my friend Art Linkletter, the TV personality. Art doesn't touch tobacco, and in the book he told why. When he was still just a youngster he got a job as a welder. A lot of the older welders chewed tobacco or dipped snuff and wanting to be one of the boys. Young Art was ready to try either or both. But one of the welders, a big, tough fellow, said, "Let me show you something, son. Take off your shoe and sock." When Art did, the man stuck a big wad of tobacco between two of Art's toes. "Now put your shoe and sock back on," he said, "and see what happens." Within a short time, Art began to feel ill. Before long he was desperately nauseated. The chemicals in the tobacco had invaded his whole system through the skin between his toes. And Art wrote, "At that moment I decided I was never going to smoke." And he never has. That was pure chemical cause and effect. The interaction of mind and body is more subtle, but it is just as real. And the interaction of infinite mind, which is God, and the human organism across the bridge known as prayer, is more mysterious still. But every minister and most laymen have seen unforgettable examples of it. I remember one night when I was a young minister in Syracuse, New York, a telephone call came from a physician I knew, Dr. Gordon Hoople. He said he had a patient who was not responding to treatment. A crisis was imminent. He wanted me to come right away. When I arrived at the home, I found Dr. Hoople and a young nurse with the patient, a middle-aged woman who seemed to be in a coma. I recognized the nurse as a member of my own congregation. "This woman is very ill," the doctor said. "I've done everything I can for her medically, but that is not enough. I treat my patients, but it is God who does the healing. You know that and I know it. Now here we are, 3 believers and this woman, who is unconscious. Let us try to fill this room with the healing grace of the greatest of all physicians, Jesus Christ. Let us image her as responding to the creative life force. Actually, there is no medical reason that she should die. But her spirit seems weak. Let's put faith into that spirit." Scripture reaches into unconscious. I remember we sat down by the bedside. First I prayed. Then Hoople prayed. Then the young nurse prayed. Then we began to quote scripture passages. It was a strange and moving experience. I felt as if there were 2 contending forces in the room, one regenerative, the other destructive, and that by praying and affirming faith through scripture, we were adding strength to the life force. I found that I could summon to mind almost any Bible passage I wanted and could recite it verbatim, even though ordinarily I could not have done this. Later, Hoople and the nurse told me they had the same experience. Hours passed. Nothing changed. Then, all at once, the patient opened her eyes, smiled at us faintly, and fell into a quiet sleep. I remember how Hoople reached out and felt her pulse with his sensitive fingers. "It's all right now," he said. "The crisis is over. Our prayers and our affirmative faith have pulled her through." And she did indeed get well. A less dramatic incident, but one which I remember vividly, happened some years ago when I was driving from Dayton, Ohio, to the little village of Bowersville, where I was born. The town was celebrating its 100th anniversary, and I had been invited, as a native son, to give the centennial address. As I drove along, my ear began to ache. I hadn't had an earache since childhood, but now I had one that grew worse and worse. By the time we reached Bowersville, I was in agony. I asked Ruth to go into the hall where I was scheduled to give my talk and tell the people in charge that I was indisposed, that they would have to delay the talk, that perhaps I couldn't deliver it at all. When Ruth was gone, I sat holding my head in my hands, hardly able to believe the amount of pain that could be generated by one misbehaving ear. As I sat there, I heard a tap on the window of the car and a stranger spoke to me. I remember he was a big man with a calm, kindly face. He evidently knew who I was, for he spoke my name. "You're not well?" he asked. I assured him that I was far from well. "I'm a believer," he said, "and I have the gift of healing. I'd like to give you a faith treatment. I think it might help." I was suspicious. "What does it consist of?" I wanted to know. "I'll put my hands on your ears," he said, "and offer a prayer of healing. I'll tell the Lord that you are needed here tonight. It is the town's birthday and people are waiting to hear you. I'll ask him to take away the pain." "What do I have to do?" I asked. "Just believe," he said, "and picture yourself as healed of this pain that is tormenting you." So I agreed. While he prayed, with his hands covering my ears, I tried to hold in mind an image of myself with two good, healthy, non-aching ears. And, to my astonishment, almost instantly the pain began to subside. It didn't vanish in one split second, but it began to diminish steadily. The man had told me to believe and visualize, and I had tried, but the relief was so remarkable that I could hardly believe it. I tried to thank the man, but he simply smiled and moved away. A moment later, Ruth came back. She had found a medical doctor and had him with her. I told them what had happened. By now the pain was perhaps 60% gone. "Well," said the doctor, "that's fine, but I would like to give you a shot of antibiotic anyway." So, at Ruth's urging, I let him give me the shot, and I'm sure it had good effect, also. Anyway, the pain continued to subside, and soon after that I was able to give my talk with almost no discomfort. Who healed me? Was it the faith healer or the doctor? Both, perhaps. Plus the power of the creative image. However it may be explained, I have had no further earaches to this very day. How can we explain the spiritual power when it is called upon that way? We can't explain it, but we know it is there. We know it works. When a prayer chain is organized for someone who is sick, with dozens or perhaps hundreds of people praying for the same result, that collective imaging of the patient's improvement can release enormous curative powers. I have seen it happen over and over again. Belief in the power of prayer and in spiritual procedures should in no way diminish our respect and gratitude for medical science. Both are gifts from God, and both, in my opinion, should be used to the utmost when needed. But science has limits. However, the power of prayer is limitless to the degree that it enables us to make contact with God, who made our bodies. I remember how my old friend Dr. Smiley Blanton handled one difficult psychiatric case. The doctor tried every possible medical approach. Nothing worked. Finally, the famous psychiatrist, then an old doctor, handed the man a Bible. "Here," he said. "Take this. Go away and read it. Then just do whatever Jesus says." See yourself as a well, normal, healthy person. If you just do that, you'll be all right. How I stopped having colds. Holding a strong mental image of yourself as a healthy person definitely reduces your susceptibility to illness. I used to have the annoying habit of getting a bad cold every February. I tried not to get it on a Sunday, because that would have interfered with my preaching. It always went through the same cycle: sniffling, itchiness, sore throat, then the vocal cords would close up and all I could do was croak unintelligibly. Finally, about 4 years ago, I said to myself, this is ridiculous. It is all in your head. You expect to get a cold when February comes. You image it and so you get one. Now put that image out of your mind. Forget it. Instead, image yourself not having a cold in February and see what happens. So I did. And I haven't had a cold since. Ruth says dryly that she began making me take more vitamins at about that time, and perhaps she did. But I think the changed image in my mind was the main thing. I remember one unusual case where negative images were put to a positive use. The man involved was prominent in literary and publishing circles in New York. He was very successful professionally, but he was an alcoholic. Sober, he was brilliant and charming, but drunk he was an obnoxious bore who embarrassed his friends, humiliated his wife, wrecked his automobiles, and in general was very bad news indeed. This man would go without drinking for weeks, sometimes months. Then he would convince himself that the problem was licked, that he could handle a drink or two. But he never could. Once he took the first drink, he couldn't stop. He would drink until he passed out, sometimes in a bar, sometimes in the street, usually after creating some dismal scene. When he came to himself after these binges, he was always filled with remorse, self-loathing, and disgust. He would vow never to touch another drop of alcohol. But then, as the memory faded, he would take the first fatal step and go through the whole sordid cycle again. Nothing seemed to break the pattern. He tried Alcoholics Anonymous, but even that powerful rescue system could not help him. One morning he woke up in Bellevue Hospital after another binge. He was sick, trembling, miserable, filled with guilt and self-condemnation. All around him were the sights and sounds and smells of a hospital ward filled with human wreckage of every description. I'm in hell, he thought, and I put myself here. If I could just remember exactly how I'm feeling now, how ashamed I am, how utterly horrible all this is, I would never take another drink. If I could just remember. After he was released and entered into another period of sobriety, he kept hearing echoes of that phrase, and the thought came to him that if once a day he would just image himself in the alcoholic ward, recall every sordid aspect of it, and relive every gruesome detail, the revulsion would be so strong that he would not take a drink that day. So he decided that every day when the idea of alcohol presented itself to him for the first time, a whiskey advertisement in the morning paper, a beer commercial on the radio, the casual mention of a cocktail party, anything, he would stop whatever he was doing for 1 full minute and image, as vividly as possible, the horrors he had undergone and put others through, each time he took that first drink. He made this ironclad rule for himself, and he stuck to it rigidly. Even if he was having a telephone conversation and the subject of alcohol was mentioned, he would excuse himself, promise to call back, and then for 1 full minute picture himself back in the alcoholic ward. Sick, miserable, remorseful, and ashamed. And it worked. He never took another drink. A remarkable example of the positive power that can emerge from a negative image. I believe the greatest health insurance a person can carry is to see himself, proudly and humbly, as a creation of God. God, who is infinitely gifted and infinitely wise, does not do bad work. If he created you in his image, and he did, that means that his perfection, his excellence, his craftsmanship are built into you. It follows then, does it not, that the best way to keep his handiwork in good running order is to stay close to him. The other day in a town where I had made a speech, a man filled with high spirits, zest, and goodwill greeted me with, "I still have the faucet." I was baffled. "What do you mean, faucet?" Oh, he said, don't you remember? You gave me the faucet idea. He went on to remind me of a talk I had given some 20 years ago, and presently I remembered the illustration he was referring to. At the time, I had been reading T.E. Lawrence's book The 7 Pillars of Wisdom. Lawrence was the great desert fighter of World War I who identified himself with the Arabs and became one of their leaders in their revolt against the Turks. After the war, Lawrence took a few of his Arab friends from the burning sands of the desert to the boulevards of Paris. He put them up in one of the most elegant hotels. He showed them all the sights, the Champs-Élysées, the Eiffel Tower, the tomb of Napoleon. But they were only mildly interested in these things. The one object in Paris that fascinated them was the faucet in the bathtub in their hotel. Lawrence would find them gathered around the tub turning on the faucet with exclamations of delight, and watching the strong stream of water which they could control at will. They kept saying, "Isn't this marvelous? All you do is turn a little wheel and you get all the water you want." It was amazing to men who had lived all their lives on the hot and arid desert sands. "You foolish fellows," Lawrence said to them. "Don't you know that this faucet is attached to a pipe, which leads to a network of pipes, which lead to great conduits, which lead to vast reservoirs? And don't you know that those reservoirs are so located that the melting snows and the rains from the mountains come surging into them? You cannot get water from a faucet unless it is connected to a source of water." So the man who had heard me tell this story said, "That little parable got through to me somehow." I realized that I badly needed a faucet attached to the vast reservoirs of God's power. I decided to go with Jesus Christ as the directing force in my life. He went on to say that he had stopped doing some things he had been doing, and where, before there had been no flow of power in his life, now it came surging through and had been flowing ever since. So if your health isn't what it should be, if your life isn't what you want it to be, if you have not reached the level of attainment that you desire, then you can do what so many happy, successful people have done: get yourself attached to the flow of spiritual power. You can attach yourself to this incredible power by wanting to be attached. You can attach yourself by believing, by imaging, and by following the word. Then, once you are attached, you will live with the power coursing through you. This power is no fantasy. It is reality, absolute reality, and one of incredible strength. It can and does enter into believing persons and thereby into situations in a way so astonishing that it should convince anyone, however skeptical, that imaging the power of God can affect persons, even situations, under the most difficult circumstances. Miracle of imaging in New Zealand. For example, I received a letter from a man in Auckland, New Zealand, stating that he has written a book and asking permission to use certain quotations from our writings. Of his own book he said, "I have tried to make it a practical guide to a healthy self-image, as well as finding fulfillment in life through the use of a master picture plan." The book is titled The Greatest Sale You'll Ever Make. And How to Make It. But this author points out that while his book, is primarily designed for salesmen, the same techniques can be used by anybody. But it was the PS to his letter that gave testimony to the amazing power of imaging faith. The PS reads, "I have been blind, but now through the power of Jesus, together with the inspiration provided by you, and the skill of a surgeon, I have got back sight in the left eye." When the local doctors said that nothing could be done, I refused to accept it, telling them, there must be someone, somewhere in the world who can help. A wonderful way I was guided to a specialist in Melbourne, Australia, and had pioneer operations in Royal Melbourne Hospital. I took your booklet, "You Can Overcome Any Problem," with me, and used to finger it day and night. I was sent home, heavily drugged, and for 2 years was not allowed to work, and then only for short periods. The day came when I could slowly read the title, "You Can Overcome Any Problem," but the rest was blank. I kept on praying and holding your booklet, and the day came when I could read your name. Finally, praise God, the time came when I could read what is inside. The piece I want permission to quote on page 17, "So never let any problem override you," to me is one of the greatest passages in the booklet. In the name of Christ, I refuse to be intimidated. Thank you, Dr. Peale, thank you. Bruce G. Hardy. The message is indeed impressive. In the name of Christ, I refuse to be intimidated. Image the power, the wonder-working power, as healing, restoring. What you can image, you truly can be. If you would like a free copy of the booklet, You Can Overcome Any Problem, referred to by Mr. Hardy, you may have it by writing to the Foundation for Christian Living, Pawling, New York, 12564. Actually, the creative healing effect of such mental attitudes and practices as positive thinking, faith, prayer, and imaging are underscored if not verified by the point of view of scientists. In an article in the Reader's Digest for September 1980, Lawrence Cherry describes the work of Dr. Lewis Thomas, president of the famed Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, whom he quotes as saying, "The natural tendency of the human body is toward health. We are amazingly tough and durable." Dr. Thomas, it seems, takes an optimistic view of the basic health of the individual. "I believe fervently in our species and have no patience with the current fashion of running the human being down. On the contrary, we are a spectacular, splendid manifestation of life. We matter. We are the newest, youngest, brightest thing around." So says Dr. Thomas in his book The Medusa and the Snail. Dr. Thomas is of the opinion that most germs are either friendly, like the ones in our body that help digestion, or simply not interested in us. The few germs that do attack us are usually soon annihilated by the body's white blood cells. As for diseases whose care is unknown at the present time, Dr. Thomas believes that science will soon learn how to eradicate them, says Lawrence Cherry, adding that in the not very distant future Dr. Thomas predicts we will be able to live out our lifespan without worrying about illness. Many of the disablements considered an inevitable part of age are actually the result of a disease process, probably involving viruses. There is no reason why these, too, shouldn't ultimately be eliminated, he says. Since the most creative element in our person, the superior factor in our entire entity, is the mind, such scientific findings as those of Dr. Lewis Thomas and other outstanding thinkers would certainly seem to support the thesis that mental activity, imaging or picturing health is a valid and productive process. It validates the affirmative belief that what you can image you can be. So visualize and picturize your own well-being. See yourself whole, healthy, and energized. Practice creative imaging. The key to health.